let's talk about Dune. This is going to be a spoiler-free conversation discussion on all things Dune, a little bit of a plot summary, a little bit of a conversation about how it's structured, the writing style. Dune is a sci-fi epic of the classic variety, and it's a little bit intimidating for readers in general. I know it was intimidating for me starting out, but I really want to talk about it in depth here today because I feel like it's definitely a book that is worth giving it a shot, especially if you like sci-fi and you want to know where some big influences came from. Dune was written in 1965 by Frank Herbert, and while it is kind of marketed as a standalone and is often treated as a standalone, it is actually the first in a series of about 6 books, I believe. So let's just get into a bit of a brief plot summary. Dune follows a family called the Atreides, who are essentially a family of nobles who has been given rule over a planet. When we first start out reading the book, it is the planet of Caladan, and then within the first chapter or so, we find out that they're actually being transferred to the planet of Arrakis. Now, this family is essentially one of, I think, 12 noble families in the galaxy, and they each kind of rule over a planet by the leave of the Emperor. And this rule consists of manufacturing and monitoring and distributing trade from that planet, as well as keeping a handle on the social and political environment of the planet itself. Arrakis is known to be a bit of a problem child when it comes to ruling, and so the fact that the Atreides have been given rule of this planet is kind of not a great sign of their standing within the Empire. We're not really sure what's going on or why at the beginning, but we know that this isn't necessarily a good move for the family, and we're kind of prepared for some conflict. Arrakis was previously ruled by the Harkonnens, and from all evidence given, the Harkonnens are not a great family, and they especially have a death wish out for the Atreides. This sets up this epic tale for quite a bit of conflict and inter-house politics and government discussions, as well as intense plot lines that are sometimes difficult to follow, but really well worth it if you pay attention. In typical sci-fi fashion, there's technology, creatures, explorations of the unknown, and some fun new world environment type things going on. Surprisingly to me though, there's actually quite a lot of bit of mysticism involved, verging on the edge of magic, as well as conversations of genetic manipulation and ancient prophecies. Dune is a little bit of a twist on the typical Chosen One prophecy and trope, and was really unique in the execution of its design. Because it was written in 1965, a lot of what is actually in Dune has been reused so often that it could potentially be something that you've seen 1,000 times over and you're just not really interested in seeing more of. But the way that Dune does it as the original is actually really unique and surprised me a lot of the time. The writing was one aspect that was also very unique, and I haven't read a lot of classic sci-fi, so I don't know if this is typical or not, but it was written in kind of a third-person omniscient viewpoint in which actually during almost every scene, we are inside the head of multiple characters within a scene. I've honestly never read anything like this before, and it can be quite difficult to engage in the story with. It's the next day, the lighting has changed, it's fine, we're just gonna keep going. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the way that the book is structured, and it has to do a little bit with how it was originally published. So originally, Dune was published in 2 serialized parts of a sci-fi magazine, and so in reading it now as one large novel, you can really tell a difference between the different parts of the book. So it is now published in, it's one book with 3 parts, book 1, book 2, book 3, and each part really has a very distinct tone, and it shifts with each part. So a bit of a non-spoilery breakdown. The first book or part is very much so completely set up, and if you've ever read a book that is just completely set up, it's a bit jarring, and it was something different than I've ever read before, but I was intrigued the whole time because he wasn't just setting up the main plot line, he was setting up the plot lines for the entire story. So there's so much being thrown at you, and you're trying to catch on and grab on to whatever you can, but you're not getting any answers whatsoever. The second part was really, honestly what I expected when I heard the original premise of Dune. What I expected it to be about was in part 2, which is kind of traveling across this planet to get to a destination, to caused some things to happen. I'm trying to be really vague. And then part 3 was the entire resolution for the story crammed into one. So all of those plot points from the setup of the first part was all put together in the third part, and part 3 was a lot more fast-paced, a lot more action-packed, and had a lot more answers in it than either part 1 or part 2. I've honestly never read anything like this, where the parts were so distinct from one and another, and I really think it added to the story, and it helped keep my attention, because I was constantly having to shift how I was reading the story and what I was trying to gain from it. As far as my personal enjoyment goes, I really loved reading this book. If you watched my road trip reading vlog or the 20 questions book tag, I talk about how much I'm loving reading this book, or how much I was loving reading this book, and honestly that continued all the way up until probably the last 100 pages. And during the last 100 pages, I felt that tonal shift in a negative way, and since it's been a couple of days since I finished it, I think I've adjusted better to the idea, but I know when I closed the book I was a bit disappointed because I felt that the tone had shifted so drastically, and it wasn't necessarily in line with what I felt like should have happened. But as this is a classic, and the dude wrote it, and it's been insanely successful and insanely impactful on the world, I don't really know if that's a valid criticism anymore, because I think it was just something I wasn't prepared for that I will be prepared for in the future. Now, I don't really know who to say that I think would love this book. I don't know who exactly to recommend this book to, but I can say that I know a group of people that are not going to enjoy this book. So if you are not someone who enjoys being thrown into the world with zero context, you will not like this book. If you are not someone who enjoys abstract and very subtle writing that you don't actually know what's going on the whole time, you will not enjoy this book. I've come to find out that those are two things that I actually really love when reading, so this was right up my alley, and I would highly recommend that you give it a shot, unless of course you just absolutely hate those two things I just mentioned, and then I wouldn't even bother, because you won't be able to continue. I have never read anything like this before, and I am really excited to reread it in the future, and to read the sequels, and to have this conversation with people who have read it before, and I am really excited that I am now a part of this cultural conversation because I have read it. As far as a 5-star rating goes, I think I'm going to leave this one at a 4-star. I do not think it's something that everyone should give a shot, because like I said, it's definitely difficult, but I am not on the same page with everyone on that, because this book is often featured on like 100 books you have to read before you die lists. Like I said, 4 stars. I would definitely encourage you to give this a shot if you love reading, and you love sci-fi, and you love classics, and you love being a part of the cultural conversation of things that have really shaped literature and science fiction and fantasy throughout the rest of the world, and through history, really. I feel like this has turned out to be a bit of a negative review, but I didn't intend for it to be that way. Like I said, I really love this book. I just know how weird it is and how it's not going to jive with all of readers, and so I wanted to lay out kind of some of those intricacies for you. That way, if you're considering reading it, you have a bit more awareness going in. I definitely was not prepped on most of these things that I've talked about here today before going into the story, and so I wanted to let you guys know about them. One last time before I sign off, it's just one of those books that you really don't know what's going on half the time, and it's probably going to take a reread or 5 before you actually figure out the plot of the story. I've actually watched a couple of plot summary videos online since then, and realized just how much I did not pick up on. I do have some spoilery things that I just kind of have to talk about, but they'll be at the end, plenty of time for you to hop off. I really think that's all I have to say non-spoilery on Dune. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't read this book, please comment down below. I'd love to get into a conversation with you about what you loved, what you didn't love, if you feel the same way as I do about its importance and its weirdness. If you like the discussion I tried to have with you here today, please don't forget to subscribe. I like to do very in-depth reviews like this on pretty much everything I read, so if that's something that interests you, make sure you stick around to see what else I've got coming up in the future. Like I said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, so some spoiler things that I have to talk about when it comes to the ending. I am honestly genuinely confused by his family's reaction to Paul at the big final climax scene where he's in basically the courtroom, the throne room, with the Harkonnens and the Emperor and just like everything going on there. I really felt confused because up until this point, there's been the conversation of making sure Paul doesn't feel like a god, of making sure Paul isn't leaning too much into this god-like figure system. And I feel like towards the end there, he went there, and I wasn't sure if it was in character for him, but this isn't exactly a character study, so I'm not really getting a deep dive into what he actually thinks and believes, so I guess that could be explained away. However, what bothers me is they've been listening to him so far up to this point, just anything he says taking him at his word, but at the same time trying not to make him into a godlike figure. But then they're in this throne room and he's making decisions and like executive orders, and he's constantly being questioned by his family behind him. Like his mom, his wife, his dude bro, his right-hand man, both right-hand men were just questioning him the whole time and asking like, are you sure you want to do this? And I don't think that's the best idea. Whereas previously, it was pretty much anything Paul says goes. And I that was really jarring for me. I didn't really like it. I thought there was an interesting conversation on like wives versus concubines and how it was just definitely something different that I've not really seen before. And I'm not really sure how I felt about it, especially the last couple of pages where they're talking about the emperor's daughter, and they're basically choosing for her a life of misery and like saying she gets no say in the matter, but she's going to become my wife, but I'm not going to love her. Like, side chick over here, you're going to be my main love because you're not really a side chick, you're my first love. I just don't know how I felt about it. It felt very anti-feminist for one, and for two, I feel more sorry for the princess who's gonna have her life basically taken away from her than I do for anyone else in this story. I did like the way the bad guys got their due and the good guys got to rise up and take over, and I'm really excited just to see where the rest of the series goes. I guess that's really all I had to say.